And we are live. Welcome to the very first live stream for the Purple Cow. So let me just roll over to our chairman, Mr. Kanthan. Welcome, sir.
And good afternoon to you all. My name is Kanthan, and I am indeed the chairman of the Capitalist Party, and I'm joined by my colleague, Roman.
Indeed, Roman Kavanagh, co-founder of the Capitalist Party and somehow treasurer as well. So that is us in a nutshell. So we thought perhaps live streaming would be the best way to actually get our messages out to the people we want to target, who might potentially vote for us, because we want intelligent people to vote for us, don't we, Camden?
Well, we pretty much want everyone possible to vote for us, but I think that people who are going to be drawn to this brand will generally tend to be people who tick that particular box. So yes.
Yes, quite, because we're interested in ideas, and that is the most fundamental aspect of this party. So, Camden, let's just start from the beginning. We've known each other for a few years now, and you actually told me about the Capitalist Party a number of years ago, and I said that you were crazy at the time, but you've pursued and you carried on, and here we are. So, when you look at the creation of the Capitalist Party, what made you want to do it, firstly?
Well, I think there's an interesting comment that just popped up from someone named Wolfie who says, intelligent people only. Well, that disqualifies me then. I don't think so. But focusing again on why we started this. I think it went back a couple of years where I kept noticing that everyone seemed to be drawn to this very amorphous idea of populism that was based on what they thought people in the country actually wanted to see. So, and this was particularly the case in terms of the DA, where I found that increasingly, instead of focusing on the principles that what's made them the strong party that they used to be back in the day of, ZACP was running the party at the time that we became a free country in 1994. And then indeed, going on through Tony Leon and Helen Ziller, they were a highly principled party fundamentally. And they kept growing at that level. And then suddenly I found that under Musi Maimane, who was, in fact, someone that I had supported very strongly in the beginning. In fact, I gave him his very first public platform when I invited him to attend an audience of YFM people at the Generation Y keynote at the Hyatt in Rosebank. And because at that time I identified him as someone with great potential who was likely to indeed end up leading the DA at some point. And instead, what we've seen is a steady drifting away from principles and rather a rush to assuage people on the basis of, you're not black enough, or let's push through more black people. You're not, you don't have enough women, let's push through a whole lot of women. You're not strong on affirmative action, all right, let's go and introduce affirmative action into our policies, which again was completely out of tune with what the DA had originally stood for. And I think that's the point you and I started having those conversations about, if we had a new political party, what would it look like?
Yeah, quite. And we're not particularly hard against the DA, so to speak, but we are traditional DA voters. We care about ideas, we care about liberal principles, generally speaking. And ideally, politics is about solving problems. That's essentially what it's supposed to be about. And after the influx of identity and all sorts
Roman,
of things within specifically the DA
I
in this
suspect
point.
that
Yes?
is your mic in fact muted by any chance? No, okay,
it is.
All right, because we have someone on the feed saying that they've got no sound on their end. And
no, everyone else seems to be fine. Mr. Buerta, just maybe unmute your YouTube, and you should be able to hear us loud and clear. So yes, so we were very disillusioned with the influx of identity politics within our politics, and I think Julius Malema is largely responsible for this because it's a very strong platform for him. And it appears that the DA have tried to incorporate it as well in a more reasonable manner, if that is possible. Whereas we just want the government to fix things or to get out the way, essentially. And there was no real political party that could unite as many different South Africans as possible under that banner of solutions first, politics second. So that's why we saw a gap in the market and decided to start the political party, the Capitalist Party of South Africa. And so yeah, so far so good.
So yeah, if I can hop in at that point, I think that it all started with recognizing first and foremost that we are a capitalist country. And in order for us to prosper, as indeed every other country that is currently prospering is doing, you have to end up embracing capitalist values. So we've seen, for example, China has been plucking 1 million people a month out of poverty because they've adopted a capitalist framework in terms of their economy. We've seen Russia is shortly about to overtake the UK in the size of its economy, again, because they've embraced capitalism. We look at the examples of Singapore. We look at the examples of Hong Kong. Right here in our neck of the woods in SADC, if you look at Mauritius, which is a tiny island which has zero resources other than tourism, and yet it is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and it is attracting investment from all over the place. And the reason for that is that they've embraced capitalism, and they've actually recognized that by building a framework that actually is business friendly and provides certainty, I can't say this strongly enough, certainty is the most crucial thing that is going to draw business to our shores. And right now we have huge uncertainty. We have the threat of expropriation of property without compensation. We have the threat in terms of electricity, which is the most basic thing that's required for any industry to be able to thrive. So all of these things provide uncertainty, which we know how to fix.
Yeah, very much so. And the beauty of capitalism is that you can mold it to the context of the country. So capitalism is practiced in Singapore is different from the capitalism practiced in Israel. Capitalism practiced in Rwanda is different from the capitalism practiced in the Scandinavian countries. But the foundational reason for success in a country is capitalism. And then you just tweak it to the context of the country that you're in. So, for example, Singapore has no private property rights for land. For example, you have 99-year leases, and that works well for them because they don't want developers or corporations to buy up all of Singapore's land and increase the prices. But that will not work in America, for example, because land is plentiful and there's lots of it to go around. So the market forces for land works better in America than in Singapore. But if we don't agree on the foundation of capitalism first, and then we can build upon policies around that foundation, we won't go anywhere as a country. The world is going, fourth industrial revolution, solving problems through technology, decentralizing power in terms of production and manufacturing. And we're still worried about land, and we're worried about the things that won't make us prosperous in any single way. So yeah, it is time for a change, and hopefully we can be the catalyst for that.
Yes,
in terms of a radical way of thinking.
You're quite right in terms of the multiple flavors of capitalism. But the most crucial thing that we need to understand, capitalism at its most basic level, is the free exchange of goods and services between individuals. And if you can have that as the core of your economy, then your economy actually prospers. Now, the only places right now where the free exchange of goods and services happen between individuals in this country are at the level of the poorest of the poor. This is down in our townships, because that's where your spaza shops actually exist. This is where you have informal structures and I'm talking about informal societal structures, not shacks. I'm talking about people where you have a group of individuals where one of them has a cell phone, and that person becomes the conduit for moving money, for example, back and forth between people. You have the spaza shop owner who ends up extending credit to people and thereby providing them a lifeline that carries them through from one month to another. All of these individual millions of transactions that happen on a day-to-day basis are what keep our country ticking over. We don't provide an enabling framework that allows people to step out of that little hole and grow and develop into large businesses. And that's the failure of our economy. Instead, what we have done is put in place hurdles that actually put obstructions in place of individuals being able to conduct business between themselves. So a minimum wage, for example, is one of the ways in which we actually hamper the growth of our economy. Because as soon as we start saying to that spaza shop owner, if you are going to hire someone to work in your spaza shop, you have to pay that person a minimum of, let's say, 2,500 Rand a month, which, is probably his profit for the entire month. If, on the other hand, he has someone who is currently doing nothing, but is willing to sit in the store for 500 Rand a month, it's 500 Rand that that person wouldn't have, and it's allowing that business to actually grow. So these are all of the things that we are focusing on in terms of how we end up growing our economy, to remove the hurdles that are in place that prevent capitalism from flourishing and allow this economy to grow.
Absolutely, because we must remember, capitalism is about trusting people to do what they want to do because they have the knowledge and the experience, and they are enabled to understand what they need to do to move ahead, to be socially mobile, to understand what education their children want, how to make money, how to get food on the table. As a state or as a government, it is very important that we don't get in the way of human flourishing. And human flourishing only occurs when people have the freedom to pursue their goals. And if we put in hurdles, we prevent social mobility, and we prevent people from acting on their desires. And by acting on your desires, and millions of people acting on their desires, this is an emergent order that is created through trade and through skill that cannot possibly be regulated by a state. And any attempt to do so leads to poverty and misery for most of the people in the country. And we've seen that throughout the 20th century. So all, as the Capitalist Party of South Africa, we're just saying, let people actually be free to pursue their own goals, irrespective of who they are.
Which is probably a good point at which we can start talking about what we stand for as opposed to what we have a problem with. And of course, one of the differences between us, everyone asked us immediately at the point at which we launched the party, where's your manifesto? And our response to that was, well, we actually don't have a manifesto. What we have are principles that draw us together. And our entire approach to how we want to influence the course of this country is to enforce those principles. If any policy comes along that aligns with our principles, we will support it. If any policy comes along that is against those principles, then we will fight against it. And more to the point, we will lobby against it among our support base and tell people exactly why that particular piece of legislation or that particular policy is bad for us as a country, why it's actually pulling us back and hindering our ability to actually prosper, and hopefully then persuade government to be able to change their direction. So shall we just go through those principles very quickly, Roman? Do you want to start with that, love?
Please do. Well, I'll start with the foundational one, which is liberty. And I think we've spoken about that quite in length already. But the basic premise is that free people know what they want to achieve in life, how to be mobile socially and otherwise in life. And we want to give as much liberty and freedom to individuals throughout South Africa to pursue their goals.
Yes, that's so then moving on from there, the second thing that's on our list is that of equality. And the whole premise of equality is that we put individual rights before group rights. The whole concept of group rights only stems from the fact that a group is composed of individuals. So if you protect the rights of an individual, you are effectively protecting the rights of the group. What does this mean in practice? It means that we must not sacrifice the interest of any individual for this whole idea of common good or the good of the majority or anything of that sort. Every individual is worthy of respect. Every individual is equal before the law. In practice, what that means is that we completely reject any concept of affirmative action that is based on race, that is based on gender, that is based on religion, that is based on sexual orientation, any of those things. All individuals need to be treated equally. We need to support the idea of a meritocracy. The whole idea is that we have the best persons at any given time fulfilling particular jobs. Now, people often turn around and ask me, what about transformation? What do you say to transformation? And my response to them always is, well, I'll say something along these lines. Are you a parent? And if the answer is yes, I'll say, well, do you want your child to be treated by a doctor of your race, or do you want your child to be treated by the best available doctor? And the answer always is by the best available doctor, obviously. And then I say, well, why in that particular case You recognize that a meritocracy is the best way to grow the country. And yet, when it comes to how we are actually shaping our government, we willing to completely toss aside those ideas and embrace this really strange concept that you need to push particular groups of people forward because of an attempt to address some historic imbalance. Look, I'm a victim of those historic imbalances. But the crucial thing for me is that I never wanted to be affirmed. I just wanted a level playing field. And a level playing field for me is not saying, I'm going to give you money. A level playing field is not saying, I'm going to make particular categories of jobs available to you. A level playing field for me is saying that we will treat you as an equal applicant for this particular process, and you will get in on merit. And I think the majority of the people of this country would actually like to be treated that way. What an insult to any person to be paraded as an affirmative action candidate. It means that you are there on the basis of the color of your skin and not what you are capable of doing. So that's equality, our second principle.
And the third one, obviously, is tolerance and absolute protection of freedom of speech. So I think this is quite self-evident to people watching, but freedom of speech is not just about letting bigots have the right to say offensive things. It is part of that. But freedom of speech allows the doorway of allowable opinion to be wide open and to discuss the ideas within a society. So, for example, as the Capitalist Party, for example, we think Black First, Land First should be on the ballot if they meet all the requirements of being on the ballot. We will not be someone taking IEC to court to prevent them from being on the ballot. We think Black First, Land First are hateful individuals and they are very much racist. But it is important to note that they aren't afraid of being racist and hateful in public. So now we know, as a private citizen myself, I can never vote for Black First, Land First because they don't actually like me and I don't like the ideas they espouse. They should be allowed to exist. They should be allowed to express the ideas that they do. And thankfully, it appears that they will fail because their ideas are not widely held by others. And many people find them absolutely repulsive and distasteful. And I mean, that's the essence of freedom of speech.
Yes, but again, I think we're talking about the others. So, let's focus on why we ourselves believe in freedom of speech. And of course, the whole idea is that if you outlaw particular points of discussion as being, a path that we shouldn't be going down. So a very specific example is how we handle our international relations. So the whole idea, for example, of criticizing our government's current policy in terms of how we deal with Israel is one of those areas that is considered to be taboo. And it actually becomes a massive stumbling block for us, because if one considers what we are trying to do in this country right now around food security in particular, and recognize that Israel is actually the world leader in agri-tech. They are able to produce something like 20 times more tomatoes from a single plant than we are able to do on our massive farms. And if we were able to implement that technology out here, we would be able to literally multiply our food supply by a factor of 10. But instead, we are not allowed to talk about it because of this notion that any engagement with Israel would be contrary to the values of the liberation struggle, which was largely supported by the Palestine Liberation Organization. So the impact of actually stifling that discussion means that we don't look for the best possible solutions that could actually take us forward. And that's a freedom of speech issue.
Absolutely. So let's just go through these quickly. Number 4, property rights protected by law. This is obviously the difference between prosperity and poverty is property rights. All other rights flow from property rights. It creates certainty, it creates wealth creation, and it creates, especially when, in terms of, if you look at the difference in North and South Korea, one has private property rights, one does not. And South Korea is obviously a far better country to live in. They are healthier, they are taller, they are better fed. And just the sheer amount of innovation that comes from South Korea dwarfs North Korea completely. And that is based on the principle of private property rights in South Korea and the lack of private property rights in North Korea.
That's correct. But private property rights, if one looks at it entirely from a social context, I think fundamentally all of us across all races in this country the most basic thing that we want to do is to leave the world a better place for our children. And for leaving the world a better place for our children means leaving a legacy. And a legacy, by and large, means that you leave generational wealth that you hand over. And for most of us, the most visible example of generational wealth is our property. I think all of us end up at some point aspiring to own our own home. It is the middle class dream. We end up paying a bond for a number of years and hopefully pay it off before we die. But the whole idea is that becomes a legacy for future generations. And of course, we invest in the education of our children as well, which is intellectual property. And we hope that they will then build generational wealth that will take them forward. But if you remove property rights from the equation, if you don't have the ability of people to build that piece of property that they're then going to be able to pass on, it's immediately destroying the fabric of society, especially if there's a threat that government is going to, at any stage, come in, take your property and give it away to someone else. You then end up in a scenario where you're not going to invest in the upkeep of that property. Also, if you're the type of person who might be inclined to start your own business and need to get money for it, the way in which more often than not you will do that is by going to the bank and using your property as security. If you are not in a position to use your property as security, which is the case for many people living on feudal land or tribal land, however you want to describe it, then you don't have the ability to tap into that reserve of money, which means that you're not able to grow your business. So property rights are actually the core of what our liberty is all about. It's the most important right, by and large.
Absolutely. So number 5 of our principles is the rule of law. So basically, we just want the state to exercise power in accordance with well-established and clearly written rules, regulations, and legal principles. So basically, the state does not have the authority to overextend its own power. It must be fairly limited in scope, narrowly defined, and ideally, the state's power is used to bring freedoms and protect rights of the citizen. That is essentially the point of state power, and the rule of law is about equality between the state and the citizen at all times.
That's absolutely right. And we've ended up with a scenario where we've discovered that, in fact, there are different sets of laws that get applied to different people. So, for example, you have the situation where you have a penny sparrow who ends up being, I think, in my view, essentially persecuted for saying something quite appalling. And you have Julius Malema, who says something very similar, and he's nowhere near in jail. My view, of course, on both of those is that hate speech should be allowed. And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of freedom of expression, where that's the way in which we identify what people are actually thinking for those of us who are the potential victims. But the whole idea of one person being more equal than others under the law is something that's abhorrent. And obviously, that's one of the crucial things that we intend to fight for.
Quite. So number 6, a right to work. And basically this goes back to the liberty principle, whereby the state should not be able to interfere in private contractual relationships or many other relationships where no harm is incurred. So for example, something like the minimum wage interferes with private contracts, as alluded to in your example earlier. And the right to work is essentially about being free to choose what you wish to pursue, what job you want to pursue, what wage you wish to get for that. And it's all about private negotiations between employer, employee, or trading partners, or supplier and clients. Essentially, the state should not have any regard to interfere with those private contracts.
So let's move on to the right to be secure on your own property and to defend yourself against intruders. My domestic worker had a home invasion last night where there were literally people who were holding her up at gunpoint, and they pretty much cleaned out her place. She lives in Tembisa, which is northeast of Johannesburg. And there is this absurd idea right now in our law that if you have a home invasion, unless there is an immediate physical threat to you, you are not allowed to take action against the people who are on your property and are robbing you blind. And it's utterly absurd. the whole idea of the castle doctrine, which is what we push for, that you should have the right to take immediate action to protect yourself and your family simply by virtue of the fact that someone has broken into your property without permission. Obviously, your property needs to be properly fenced off and that type of thing. But someone entering your home without permission and breaking and entering effectively is, to my mind, an immediate case where you should be at liberty to use any justifiable violence in order to take out those people, because they are an immediate threat to your family. And our law currently doesn't allow for that.
Indeed, and we do have another founding member called Gideon Hubert, who will be on the live stream very soon, hopefully this week, to talk more about protection and using tools to protect yourselves, and the policies of the Capitalist Party, how that enables people to protect themselves in a far easier and more fair way, in our opinion. So let's go to number 8, free markets and the international free trade based on enlightened self-interest. Very much like our policy for work. The international policy of South Africa should be for the benefit of South African citizens and not about other things. So do you want to elaborate on that, Gavin?
Well, there's a couple of specific examples that come to mind. For example, when we start imposing undue regulations upon the US market in terms of trade, when we are entirely dependent upon our current access through that market via the African Growth Opportunity Act, which basically allows our goods to get into the US at pretty much no tariffs. But we then try and put obstructions in the way of the US to get their goods into the country. So that's one example. We also have the scenario where we are reluctant to buy, again, technology from Israel. We have the Cape Town water crisis, where if we had actually bought desalination plants from Israel, we would have been able to solve the Cape Town water crisis almost immediately. But the reason why we didn't do it, and the DA-led government of the town was not prepared to do so, because they were afraid of the political fallout that would actually result from it. By the same token, lots of people have very strong feelings about the Republic of Iran. The Republic of Iran is one of those countries that we can actually buy oil from, because the oil that we are able to buy in our country needs to be processed through our refineries. And Iran is one of the countries that can actually supply us with oil. So no matter what our feelings are about the government of Iran or the way in which they end up treating their citizens, if it's the cheapest and most accessible source of oil for our country and is going to cost us less money, which is the case, then we should be buying oil from them. But we do not have this level of pragmatism that gets applied to how we engage with the rest of the world right now. And that needs to change.
Absolutely. It needs to change for the betterment of the South African citizen, of course. Number 9, firearms for self-defense.
Out and away our most controversial policy so far. You want to talk to that very quickly?
Yeah, for some reason. So it's controversial in a way because we don't have a big gun culture in South Africa, but basically a gun is just a tool, and we would like citizens to be properly trained and competent to be able to own this tool should they choose to own it, of course. So we actually advocate that safe firearm ownership and handling should be done at a school level as an extramural activity, which was done for many years and still is done in some schools today in South Africa. And if we teach people that a gun is just a tool and how to use it correctly, and then they have the choice to buy one after the fact, we would have a country where many more people would be armed, and criminals who are carrying unlicensed firearms might be wary of attacking certain people because they don't know whether that person is armed. So it's a tactic to prevent crime, but also a tactic to, not a tactic, it's a policy to empower people to take action for their own safety as well. And that's
exactly right. I mean, the point is, I don't carry a firearm myself, and I'm highly unlikely to end up carrying a firearm. But do I support the right of other people to carry firearms for their own self-protection if they are properly trained in the safe use of said firearms? Absolutely, I do. I think that if we are going to end up trusting our lives to the people who currently carry firearms, for example, the people that most of us end up encountering who carry firearms are the people who work for the armed response teams. We have no idea whether they've been properly trained in the safe use of those firearms, whether they actually have the psychological capability of being able to assess the situation accurately and to be able to respond. I'm far more likely to be trusting of a close family member who has had training in the safe use of firearms, and more importantly, is going to take appropriate steps to protect our family when facing an immediate threat, rather than an arbitrary police person bursting onto the scene and not knowing which end of the gun to point at and accidentally winging someone. These are serious threats that we cross on a day-to-day basis. And the whole idea that we can trust our government with firearms, but we don't trust them with ESCOM, we don't trust them with our healthcare system, we don't trust them with a million other things, but we turn around and say, well, actually, the government of this country are the only people who should have legal guns. It's absurd.
It is absurd. And as a firearm owner myself, it took me 8 months to get mine. I do carry it often. I've never had to use it, thankfully, so I don't intend to use it ever. But for me, it's very important that I know that if something had to happen or I have been aggressed against, I will be able to use it in good faith, because I do train fairly often with it and take part in many activities that allow me to be quite competent in handling a firearm. It's a tool that requires lots of responsibility, and that responsibility comes with training, and we want safe and legal firearm ownership at all times. We are certainly not advocating for anything else.
And we are certainly not advocating the American model where you can walk into a supermarket and pick up a gun. We do want people to be properly trained in the safe use of firearms. But again, you're licensing the person, not the weapon. Right now, the idea of licensing an incompetent person to carry a firearm is pretty absurd. So every time you buy a new car, you don't need to go for a new driving test. So in exactly the same way, you license the person based on their competence with a firearm, and then allow them to go out and buy the firearm rather than the other way around. So let's finally talk to point 10, which is fraternity, the whole idea of spontaneous order.
So this is also inextricably linked to liberty. That's why liberty is the most fundamental principle of the capitalist party, because it leads to all the other principles making sense. So basically, social order, you have what is called emergent social order, where independent people pursue their own goals every single day. They trade with each other, they talk to each other, they make plans to see each other, they join clubs, they create clubs, things like that. And out of all of these millions of interactions every day, there's an order that forms spontaneously. That's not a word. Spontaneously. That's a better word. And an order is formed naturally, and it evolves from there by people just taking decisions every single day. So we have thousands of charities who do work every single day, who are not funded by the government, who don't have regulations applied to them, but they do great work in alleviating suffering and poverty. We have organizations that represent certain people, certain demographics, who fight on the behalf of those people. We've got like Sweat, who fights for sex workers. We have AfriForum, who fights for their members. None of these organizations needed a government regulation or policy to exist. They merely exist, and they create order, and they fight for the principles they believe in. And that is the essence of spontaneous order. Free people making decisions to solve problems that they face.
Right, so that's our 10 principles. So I think we should now move on to answering the questions that have been flowing fast and furious on the timeline here. So let's have a look. Someone, Pranay from Nelspruit, tried to turn Nelspruit purple. Thank you. Some questions in terms of whether we're going to be selling merchandise. Well, actually, we're not going to be selling merchandise, but we are very happy for people to make their own merchandise. And we'll make the branding available on our website.
Indeed. And then it does ask how many votes do we need to go to Parliament to get 10 seats. So it does depend on the amount of registered voters and the turnout, but it does vary between 35,000 to about 50,000 votes depending on a variety of factors. So for about 10 seats, at the minimum, at least 350,000, at the top 550,000 votes to get 10 seats in parliament.
Yes, I'm just looking in terms of the other questions that are being asked right now on the timeline. There's lots of statements of support coming through, but I'm looking for questions in particular.
Well, there's one from Ms. Fenter. If your leadership has equal authority as you claim, how do you make decisions? Does everyone have veto?
It's a great question. Look, my theory in terms of 10 people, think of it this way: you can actually put 10 people with hugely disparate views into an elevator, and by the time that elevator has gone from the ground floor to the top floor, you can actually reach consensus on decisions among those people. Particularly in our case, all of this is driven by those 10 principles that pull us together as a party. So if that's the basis for the decision making, it's actually very quick. We haven't had a scenario yet where we needed to exercise a veto, simply because those 10 principles draw us together. I think a veto might be something that would become an issue at the point at which our membership base grows, which is definitely going to be the case after this election. We started off small with 10 people, and that 10 people comprise the membership right now. In terms of our constitution, we put in place decision-making processes and how things will actually be affected going forward. But for now, we haven't had a problem. So I think, let's hope it continues that way until after the elections.
Right, and it's important to note that we are 10 people united by principles. We have different opinions on various other things, but we agree on the 10 principles. So we are able to formulate answers to questions or formulate policy that suits the party while remaining independent on things that don't fall within those principles that we set out. And there's quite a few questions about how do they get involved. So the easiest way is to go look at our brand new forum, which is forum.capitalist.org.za. There, we actually sort of wish to crowdsource policy, if you will, open up our policy making decisions to the public, and in line with our policies on liberty, spontaneous order, and freedom of speech, we will take the best form of policies and see how we can implement them more, in a way that is cheap, simple, and effective. And we are very open and transparent about that. We are not the god kings of this political party. We are more than happy to have anyone come in with a good idea and use the forums to express that. And it is there. You just have to follow forum.capitalist.org.za.
There's a question coming by in terms of how would we fix the energy crisis in South Africa. The quick and easy answer that we had to that particular problem was, currently there's a cap in terms of what independent power producers are allowed to feed into the grid. It's utterly stupid, because essentially what you're saying is that we'll only buy from you up to a certain point. Now, the reason why this is a bad idea is, let's take, for example, if you have a mine, and in order to keep the mine ticking over, people will invest in putting in place generator capacity so that you can keep that mine running. Now, if there is an understanding on the part of the mine owners that they are able to sell surplus capacity off to Eskom, then they will actually invest in bigger and better generational capacity, which might not be cost effective to keep that mine working more effectively right now. But if they're able to sell more of the surplus across to Eskom, then from a capital expenditure point of view, it makes a lot of sense for them to invest in that bigger generational capacity. But by Eskom turning around and saying, we only will buy from each individual producer up to a particular point, it's immediately putting a cap on the private sector getting involved in the power generation business. So we are saying very simply, just lift the restrictions. So anyone who is able to sell electricity into the grid at a price point that's better than where it is right now should be allowed to do so. And that's the immediate solution that we can do to fix the problems that we have at Eskom. Eskom is a basket case, but if you want to know simple, effective, cheap, that's the way to do it.
Absolutely. So there's a common question about, you're a new small party. Do you believe you could win this election? Now, we are not trying to win this election at all. We are wanting to get 10 seats in parliament where we can implement the 10 plans on our website by solving police, by solving toilets in schools, by solving cash in transit heists. Those plans that we have, which are cheap, simple, and effective, and that can be done very, very easily. That is the reason why we want 10 seats. We are not here to win the election. We're not here to govern the country. Certainly not. We don't have plans to govern the country anytime soon. We just want to make a solution-based political party the mainstay in Parliament after May 8th.
Yes, one of the interesting things that's been happening of late is that we've been seeing these messages that have been going out, particularly from the Democratic Alliance, who've been telling people, don't dilute the vote. A vote for a smaller party is a wasted vote. It's absolutely not true. Now, in the first place, where the DA is currently sitting, which is something like 22% of the national vote, even if the DA ended up growing its voter base by 50%, so in other words, they went from 22% to 33%, that's still not enough for them to form a government. So we are not diluting the vote at this point. Voting for the DA in your province, particularly if you happen to live in, let's say, Gauteng, makes a lot of sense, because there's a very real possibility in the province that the DA is able to take control. I, for one, intend voting for the DA in Gauteng, which is where I happen to live right now. If I was in KZN, I would probably vote for the IFP, because I think that that is the party that is most likely to grow its base most strongly in that province. But right now, in terms of exerting influence on the national stage, we want to get 10 people in there to sit in those portfolio committees, which is where the decisions get taken in terms of how our money gets spent. Because we essentially know how to call bullshit when we see things being spent in a way that it shouldn't be spent. So if the Minister of Education says that she wants to spend 10 billion rand in order to fix school toilets, we immediately able to stick up our hands and say, no, actually, we can fix those pit toilets for less than 1 billion rand, all 24,000 of them, and we can do it in less than 6 months. So that's the level of influence that we can bring to bear, because we have been, and we are in the private sector. We know how to make things work. That's the type of on-the-ground skill that nearly every one of the 400 members of Parliament do not have. They've never worked in the private sector. They've never needed to start a business. They've never needed to actually report to a board of directors and show a profit. And we bring those skills to bear, because those are things that we have done for most of our working lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to be free from the tyranny of incompetence by people who have no skin in the game and who haven't provided value to others in the private sector. We have done so for a long time, and if we can bring our experience in Parliament and solve major issues in the short term with the plans that we have on our website, that is the essence of the party. It's not to create lifelong parliamentarians for our side. It's about solving solutions on a national level. So we've got another 5 minutes to go, so we'll answer maybe 2 or 3 more questions.
I want to take a question from someone asked, your example of the minimum wage and small business makes sense. Less so, however, when it applies to large corporations. Actually, the answer to that is no. It's the whole idea of a minimum wage should apply across the board, that there should be no minimum wage. Here's the way in which this actually ends up working. If you have no minimum wage, it means that all companies are free to employ as many people as they possibly want to employ. Now, the reason why this is a good thing for social cohesion is, if, let's say, you have a minimum wage of maybe, I don't know, 6,000 rand a month that you put in place. It is much better to have 5 people in the family earning 2,000 rand a month than 1 person in the family earning 6,000 rand a month. Because from a social cohesion point of view, it means that each person in that family is developing a sense of self-worth because they are earning their own money. It also means that you eliminate a lot of the power play that currently happens around wage earners. If you look in terms of domestic abuse as a very specific example, ask yourself how much domestic abuse could be eliminated overnight if people in the household were not dependent upon that single abusive breadwinner. Because if they go to the police station, report that breadwinner and put that breadwinner in jail, What happens to the family? They starve. So these are the unintended consequences of what comes about when you arbitrarily put in place things like minimum wage. And we mean so well. You know, we think about the fact like, I go to Woolworths shopping and this barely covers my shopping bill. And how can anyone survive on it? Guess what? People actually do. But if you create a scenario where everyone is employed, once everyone is employed, you'll have a natural tendency for wages to rise. People said that what Trump was doing in the US was absolutely crazy. Employment levels are now at record highs. And for the first time, because of the fact that everyone has a job and no one's actually competing for the bottom of the pile, real wages in the US have risen for the first time in 20 years. Now think of what that means for the majority of the people of that country. And it all came about from the fact that the markets were actually set free. Walmart, which is one of the stingiest groups in the entire world, has raised its wages because of the fact that they need to get people to work in their shops. And if those people are able to pick and choose where they want to work, then they will pretty much do so. I mean, would you rather be working at a small coffee shop in your town or working for Walmart? I'd probably pick the small coffee shop unless Walmart's paying me significantly more money.
Indeed. Indeed, cannot disagree with that. So let me just see. What will happen if people call us racist, Canthan? We just laugh and point because they've lost the argument, essentially.
No, I'm not a racist. A racist is someone who hates whites more than is necessary.
That sounds like me. I dislike some whites, mostly.
No, but seriously, the whole idea of identity politics and this idea that you need to single out people based on their race. We're a fantastic country. I've said this so many times. I believe truly, honestly, race relations in our country are better than any other country in the world. I travel extensively. You know, the levels of racial intolerance that I see in other parts of the world, I never see happening out here. You want to see racial cohesion in our country? Just go on payday to any major shopping center and watch the line of people waiting to draw cash from the ATM. Watch how they engage with each other, the conversation that happens, the banter. They talk about, we generally united in how badly run our country is. We generally united in how our government is stealing money from us, but we get on fantastically well. And then we move to the mainstream media and social media, and everyone's talking about conflict all the time. The real world outside is not conflict. The real world outside, we're a fantastic bunch of people. We get along splendidly.
Indeed, and as a testament to South Africans generally, if you look at our past, that sort of stuff tears apart countries quite dramatically. In the Balkans, in some parts of Asia as well, in the Middle East, it's still happening to this day. And yeah, we went through it, and we're still getting through it, and we shouldn't allow others to dissuade us from working together anyway, because we do so on a day-to-day basis, irrespective of what some people in power might want. So, Camden, I think I'm going to call it there. Any last words from you?
I'm really quite thrilled at the number of people who have actually taken time out from their midday to join this this video cast of ours, and it is going to be up on our YouTube channel. Please refer your friends to it to the discussion later on. We hope to be doing this on a fairly regular basis. Daily might be a bit much, but we'll certainly keep posting in the regular places on Twitter and on Facebook and hopefully on Instagram too, in terms of when the next one is going to come up. And we'll try and collect questions that you feed to us on those channels, and we'll try and answer them as well.
Indeed. And just before we go, this live streaming, constant live streaming is something that we will continue after the election. This is the way we can tell our supporters what's happening in the portfolio committees, what bills are trying to be passed, if they are problematic or not, and if they are, how to fight them, how to join public participation in the political system. And we're a modern party, so the internet is the gift that has been given to us to use, and we will use it for that purpose. So on my side, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been quite interesting to see the comments, and really gratified by the amount of people watching. We do have to do a live stream about 3 to 4 times a week going forward, with different members of the Purple Cow as well. So just keep an eye out on our social media to find out. And excellent. We'll see you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.